cops and other law enforcement people of Reddit, what were some cases you worked on that made you think, even if for a moment, that something supernatural paranormal was going on? EMT here. Once had a call at our local mall. Show up and an 8-year-old was having breathing problems. Her mother, aunt and cousin had just been caught stealing and it was late at night. We assumed the breathing problem was stress induced. Once we got into the back of our unit, she looked my partner and myself in the eyes and said that she lived at a bad place. She said she lived with demons, and I at you not as she described the demons. Her heart rate plummeted to 90 BPM to 45 BPM in a matter of seconds. My partner and I looked at each other and immediately started trying to lighten the mood and preparing for a code. She ended up being okay. I will never forget that experience. Edit. Yes, once we had her stable. Police were definitely involved. My medic contacted CPS as well. My grandpa was a Rio in Vietnam. Basically the guy who told the pilot where to go and what was ahead. One day him and his team is finishing up a mission, and one of his buddies in another jet barrel rolls over them. He then descends into the clouds. They never saw them again. He just vanished. They searched for weeks but no crash site. No communications. Nothing. Just poof. Gone. Edit. Holy crap, this blew up. For clarification, it was an aerial roll, not a barrel roll. Sorry, I was tired. And they were coming home from a mission. They were over friendly territory when he vanished. They were over the cloud line. So my grandpa isn't sure of where exactly they were when he vanished. Former EMT firefighter here. One night we got a call to do a wellness check on someone who dialed 911 but didn't respond to the operator. We pull up to the address and the house looks perfectly quaint and a little old lady greets us at the door. We asked her if she knew who placed the call, but she told us that she lived alone since her husband died. We barely got back to the station before a call comes in again. Same address as before. So we drive back out, talk to the old lady again, then leave again. And just as we get back to the station, same call, same address, no response. We drive out there again, believing that the old lady must have been confused. But this time when we pulled into the driveway, the old lady wasn't at the door to greet us. There was no reply at the door, but it was unlocked. We take a peek inside to find the old lady was on the floor and wasn't breathing. We rushed in to help and got her to a hospital in stable condition. When she woke up in the ambulance, she still claimed that she never called us, and that we arrived almost immediately after she had fallen. It was a 15-minute drive to her house from the station. Before she was admitted to the hospital, she asked me and another EMT if we could bring her knitting needles and bag of clothes to her in the hospital. I offered to pick up her stuff because I had a friend who lived in that area and we were gonna hang out anyways. I pick up my friend and drive to the lady's house. I ran inside to grab the bag and knitting stuff while my buddy sat in the car. But just as I was leaving, I swear I felt a hand on my back and heard a voice say thank you. When I get back in the car, my friend asked me why couldn't the lady's husband bring her stuff to the hospital. I explained that her husband was dead. But when I said that, my friend said, but I saw an old guy in the window. He smiled and waved at me. At first I refused to believe in anything supernatural. So I called the police and asked them to do a sweep of the house. I thought it was a squatter. Nothing was out of the ordinary, and no one was inside. I later brought my friend to visit the lady. He started describing the old dude who was in the window, but the old lady almost immediately started tearing up and said, "That's my Harold." When I was in Afghanistan on guard duty, I turned to see this huge panther in the middle of a farm field. The thing must have been 30 feet long. My heart started pounding like crazy and I just about radioed it in. Then I realized my nods removed depth perception and I was seeing a normal cat about 5 or so feet in front of me on the guard shack ledge. Obligatory not my story, but when I read this I thought it was pretty ducked. An elderly lady phoned 911 and requested that they send some policemen down to her house because she saw a shadowy figure lurking in her backyard. She was living by herself at night and didn't feel safe watching someone through her window. When the policemen arrived, the door was unlocked. They walked in and found the lady seated facing the window and they went to go check the backyard. There were no signs of anyone attempting to break and enter and nothing was missing. She had very tall fences surrounding her property, making it nearly impossible for anyone to get into it. They did, however, find footprints on the inside of her home. It was quite possible that she had left the door unlocked and wasn't looking outside, but rather at a reflection of someone inside of her home, behind her. This is unexplained, and probably just coincidence, but I still never mention it to my co-workers. I spent some time as a homicide investigator. We would respond to all apparent suicides and investigate them just to make sure it wasn't a homicide. Usually we determined a motive for suicide and found a note or other indicator that the person killed themselves. One guy just taped a note to his chest that said "Happy Now Itch" and made sure his wife found him after he hanged himself. But occasionally you get a case where all forensic evidence indicates that the person killed themselves, but there's no note and no discernible reason why this person would be suicidal. These are people in good health with decent careers and a seemingly happy family life. But who knows what's really going on with someone? Here's the part that freaks me out. I've worked maybe 10 suicides like this. The last 3 before I left homicide all had the same thing at the scene. These was a little decorative wicker lighthouse at each location. It was the same lighthouse, same design and painted white and blue. It stuck out to me the first time because it was by the bed where the body was. But 2 weeks later I saw the same damn lighthouse on another suicide and even pointed out the coincidence to a patrol officer. A few months later I go on another suicide and I see that same wicker lighthouse. That's when it clicks that it's always been unexplained suicides. I go back and look at crime scene photos from every suicide I've worked. In 2 of them I see what could be the wicker lighthouse, but the angle is off and there's too much junk around to say for sure. I dunno. I thought it was creepy as hell but I transferred a couple of months later and I let it go. Edit. Well, that got more of a response than I was anticipating. To answer the question of was it a serial killer, I very much doubt it. These were clearly suicides, most of which had no feasible alternative explanation. We work every suicide as if it were a homicide. An apparent suicide is almost always a suicide, but we err on the side of caution. Also, while serial killers are actually more common than most people think, they rarely leave calling cards or anything like you see in movies. It's usually some ducked up dude that has a particular taste. I really do think it was an odd coincidence, but it was still pretty duckin' creepy. I am a CNA in a local hospital. One of my patients just had a quad bypass, open heart surgery, and I went in to check her vitals. The room was dim and the hall was quiet. I'm looking at her and in the corner of my eye I see something drop from the ceiling out of nowhere. It makes a big clunk sound and I turn to see what it could be. There's nothing there. At that moment my patient looks up at me and say "My dad's here." Passes back out. I finish my job and leave. When I would go to that floor again as a floater I would hate to go into that room. Not led but I'm paramedic fire. Late summer night responding to a call in a rural area. My partner and I were driving down a winding 2-lane highway in the middle of nowhere. No light of any kind other than the headlights and moon. We're coming up on a sharp right turn when I see a man traveling across the grass from an area of brush. He's moving very quickly and smoothly as if hauling us on a bicycle. No up and down motion like running. Obviously, I'm pretty confused about a hillbilly on a bike in the middle of the night but not surprised. He comes to a tree and stops. It's about this time we're driving by him. Look out window and see a man standing next to this tree with no bike or anything in sight. Just standing there staring at the truck passing by. My hair is standing up. We continue towards the call and I ask my partner if he had seen that guy. His response is, "Man, I thought I was crazy." Edit for clarity. Am I doing this right? He could have been freakishly fast running. Old school ghost road hit the bike. Or I could be a plain dumbass. Perhaps sleep deprived is a better description. Oh. What made it so freaky was the speed he floated across grass gravel. The abrupt stop. And then the stare. Been doing this for years and it's the only thing that could come close to paranormal. Adding to the creepy factor was that we were miles from any house, store, or bar. Edit also for some grammar. My dad used to work as a correctional officer at Goulburn Jail in Australia, which is probably one of the oldest and hardest prisons there. A story he tells of his time there is one I always remember. He said that the whole place was creepy anyway, not helped by some of the inmates at the time including the notorious Ivan Millett, on which Ossewolf Creek is based. Anyway, first thing he noticed was that dogs would outright refuse to enter the prison. He said they couldn't get them past the gate no matter how hard they tried. But the creepiest occurrence was one night when they heard the sound of running booted footsteps. Everyone was in their cell so they couldn't figure out what was causing it. Next thing, all the doors of the open and unoccupied cells on the top floor were banged shut, one after the other with loud clangs. Then they see the source of the running noise. Now dad swears this is what he and his colleague, so he has another witness, saw. Apparently they looked up and saw what looked like disembodied hobnail boots run down the aisle right over their heads, banging as they went. Dad decided to stop working in the prison not long after this. Super creepy. Not a cop, but had one tell us a story. When I was in like GR 6 I lived in Prince Edward Island. We had the opportunity to talk to an officer. It was supposed to be like a dare program thing. At the end we got to ask questions. And of course there'd be the typical questions that kids would ask, like, did you ever shoot anyone? He shot at, but didn't actually shoot anyone. Or so he told us. Then someone asks, what's the creepiest thing you've seen? I probably don't remember all the details because it was years ago. But it went kind of like this. There was a small island just off the coast of Pay, and one night people had called the police to report a baby crying from the island. The police show up, and sure enough they hear a baby crying. They make their way over to the cries, but when they get to the island the crying stopped. They searched everywhere and guess what they found? Nothing. No baby or any sign that someone might be there. They started to leave the island, and immediately the baby crying starts up. Of course they go back, and it stops. I can't remember how long they were looking, but they haven't found anything. And you could tell it has been bothering him for a long time by the way he talked about it. It always creeped me out and I doubt I'll ever forget about it. Weird things happen on Pay. Edit. Added clarification about what Pay is. Cop here. Partner and I were dispatched to a welfare check. Elderly guy. Nobody had seen him in a few days. Mail overflowing in mailbox. Missed a doctor's appointment. Car hasn't moved. etc. We both know we are about to find a body. We arrive on scene and can't get anyone to the door. Look through the window and sure enough, we can see his foot on the floor in the living room. My partner is a corporal and pulls rank and makes me go first. Door is unlocked and as soon as we open it we smell a mostly fresh dead body. Almost relieved. We both enter and he tells me to check vitals on dead dude. He is obviously dead, with lividity, dried feces on him and dried saliva around his mouth. So I go to stand over him and see if I can get a pulse, at which point he takes a deep breath, rolls over, and asks why we are in his house. At this point we both start screaming oh it's and what the ducks as we both run out of the house. We called EMS and they transported him. Said they couldn't get a blood pressure or pulse on him. I think he died a week later in the hospital. I still get jokes about raising the dead. I was an EMT for a while. We got a call about someone who was riding their bike at a breakneck speed when they hit a car head first without a helmet. We went over immediately, despite the fact that it was broad daylight and we were in the middle of suburbia on a Saturday. Nobody even came to check on this poor guy. Seriously, the streets were empty. Usually a massive crowd gathers around violent accidents like this. So his skull was pretty much smashed in and he was unresponsive. It was the worst head injury I'd ever seen. We assessed that he had a major skull fracture, a concussion, and he was bleeding profusely. He was also missing teeth and had a minor road rash. But fortunately he wasn't missing much skin. To give you an idea of how bad it was, this was the kind of injury that most people don't survive. If you did survive, you'd basically be a crippled vegetable. Normally we would have moved him off the road, but when someone has a head-neck injury that isn't very safe. My partner, who was also training me as I was still kinda new, went to check his pulse while I began to unload our gear. He crouched down, felt for a pulse for a while, and then stood up and opened his mouth to say something. Suddenly, the guy ducking jumped up. He didn't use his arms to pick himself up, he just ducking jumped to his feet. It startled the two of us. He looked at us, smiled, and attempted to grab his bike. We tried to stop him, but we didn't exactly want to wrestle him to the ground given his condition. He gets away from us and bolts into the woods without his bike. My partner was in even more disbelief than I was. He just stared at where the man had run off, mouth agape. Then he turned to me and muttered he had no ducking pulse. Man, I asked him if he was sure and he swore up and down that the biker was clinically dead. We contacted the authorities for assistance and they sent a search and rescue team into the forest. I don't know if he was found or not, because we normally don't get much information about patients after they go to the professionals. Keep in mind that this was the Pine Barrens, so they had a lot of ground to cover. My best guess is that he went to a loved one's house out of confusion. What I found odd about that is, head injuries bleed like ducking hell. So you'd think the guy would leave a long red trail of blood for the cops to follow. Edit. Grammar. I originally typed on mobile. Sorry. Edit 2. It seems I left out some details. 1. I'm not an EMT anymore. I was only an EMT for about a year. I decided the medical field wasn't for me and I switched out to pursue computer science. 2. Don't get EMT and paramedic mixed up. We are only taught the basics of first aid, and then we just take a test. It's basically the lowest level job you can get in the medical field, so we can't legally pronounce someone dead. In fact, we almost always leave fatal accidents to the more qualified people. Had this person actually been dead, we wouldn't have done much. 3. I didn't mean this was a fatal accident. The shock wasn't that he just sprung back to life, but rather that he was alive despite lacking a pulse. 4. The guy was riding his bike very quickly through a suburban area when he struck a parked car. The car was a hatchback, parallel parked on the street. The house the car was parked outside of was, presumably, who called us in. But for whatever reason people seem to think that you can just call us and be done with it. It was a bit out of the ordinary that nobody seemed to notice that an accident happened, though. 5. I have no idea what happened to the guy. Head injuries usually cause people to become violent and cooperative, but you've got to be very careful with them, because moving their head neck around too much can cause damage to the spine. When he got up it really took us by surprise, and it didn't help that he moved pretty damn quickly. As he attempted to grab his bike, my partner attempted to grab his arm. He pretty quickly slipped away and ran. We immediately contacted authorities and told them. They arrived. We told them what we knew, and then they sent a small team to find him. I imagine they did find him, because he clearly was never reported missing. If he had, I imagine the news would have jumped on it. The first responders are never really given information about a patient after they do their job, so I can't say for sure what happened to him after he ran. I can say with complete confidence that he had no pulse when we found him, but somehow he was still alive. Edit 3. My inbox is ducked. I really didn't think this was that interesting. Thanks for the karma. Edit 4. I owe a friend of mine a favor, and I decided to pay it back by seizing the opportunity to shamelessly promote his music for him. It actually is kinda good though. I wouldn't be helping him out here if I didn't think so. Here's his Bandcamp. Please give him a chance. He works really hard on this stuff and I want to see him succeed. I work in a pre-Civil War town that has lots of antebellum homes that survived the war. Ghost hunters have been to the town on several occasions. There is this one antebellum mansion that is more of a museum, that gets alarm calls semi-frequently. Every time, the side door to the house is open and the kitchen has all cabinet doors and drawers open. Every ducking time. A caretaker says it's been happening since she started looking after the place about 30 years ago. We don't clear it without backup. Not a cop, but was told this by a cop on the night shift a couple years back. About 3 in the morning, the sound-activated alarms at the local school were triggered. The reason? They picked up on small children laughing. The cop gave a big nope to that call and just half-heartedly shined a spotlight on the area from his moving car. Not my story but my husband's. He is a correctional officer and was working the night shift. He told me that around 2 almost 3 in the morning he had to do rounds and do counting. As he was passing a cell he said he heard an inmate bang on the cell door and scream help. He ran back to the cell, told the tower officer to open the door. As he shines his light in the cell, the inmate that is housed there wakes up asking if everything is okay. It left him confused for the longest time. My husband no longer works the night shift. My partner and I received a 911 call from an old woman having a dispute with someone. We get to the house and she says she alone. We say, who are you having a dispute with? She says, Oh, just a spirit in one of my rooms. Immediately me and partner look at each other and give the olay she's elderly. It's prob dementia or something along those lines. As we're talking to her, she's explaining how sometimes a bad spirit comes around. He states that he's in the back room and, of course, the lights don't work. We try to tell her that spirits probably aren't in her house and we have to get to another 911 call. She insists we check it out. So we do. Now, the house, the way she was speaking about spirits, made me believe something was there. When we got the room and she opened the door, seeing a ghost wouldn't have shocked me. She did say that it's usually in the corner up on the ceiling. Well, that corner was dark and had the freakiest shadow that legitimately was terrifying. My partner and I shine our flashlights on the whole room and thankfully, nothing was there. We told the lady, "Nope, you're good. Nothing going on here." I said to her, "If you feel there's a spirit there, the NYPD cannot help you. Go to a local church, religious institution of your choosing, and best of luck." We got the duck out of there. Bedtime, check. Lights off, check. Quick look at Reddit, check. Supernatural EMT police cases okay. 4 AM still awake. WTF was that? Former inmate in a small county jail in Oregon. At about 2 AM one night, the radio in the pod started squealing really loud. All static screeching. One of the COs came in and turned it down. Changed the station. Walked back out. Next day when I was working in the kitchen, one of the nicer COs came in and was talking to us about what happened the night before. Apparently on the video of the pod, you can see something of a shadow come out of one of the cells and move to the radio. About a minute later, there was a flash in front of the radio before it got loud. Unfortunately, I ended up back in jail and got placed in the cell the CO said the shadow had came out from. Something about that cell creeped me out. It almost sucked the thoughts right from you. Some edits. I was in jail for being a general pose. Nothing with drugs, punching kids or anything. Just being a pose. A time of life I regret dearly. I spent about 11 days in the cell. And after maybe the third I was asking to get put somewhere else. Even PC. Protective custody. If you're anything like me, your mind runs a million miles a minute. As soon as you walked into the cell you just felt empty. All emotions. All thoughts. Just drained. HP edit. It was dementors. My dad used to work as a CO, corrections officer, at a rural prison. He drove perimeter, which just means he made circles around the jail in a truck, checking empty buildings for runaway inmates and just generally being bored for 8 hours every night. One night, my dad is parked on a hill just reading a magazine when he starts to feel a thumping in his body. He described it as the feeling you get when speakers are playing a song with really heavy bass and you can feel the bass in your whole body. Anyway, he puts the magazine down and checks his rear view, and he sees someone outside the truck. He grabs his pistol and jumps out of the truck, weapon drawn. When he gets outside, he sees a procession of Native Americans walking through the truck and directly through his seat, only to disappear at the exact spot he was sitting. He said it was clear they were ghosts because many of them appeared injured. This went on for a few seconds, and then whole procession disappeared. He called the other perimeter guy on his walkie to try to explain, and the other guy almost immediately stopped communicating. Turns out the other guy had seen this happen before, but didn't believe in ghosts, so he wouldn't talk about it. Patrol officer here. This is not my story but my partner's, and all 3 officers on scene verified this story too. So my partner responds to a priority breaking and entering call. A house sitter dog sitter calls and says that he can hear loud banging and footsteps coming from downstairs, the ground floor, and he should be the only one home. The house sitter and the dog are both upstairs. Dog is in a cage, so officers respond priority, including a K9 officer. Police release K9 into the house first to clear the house. K9 comes out empty-handed. 3 officers then go inside the house and clear it themselves. Again, nothing and nobody inside. Officers then step out front with the house sitter that called 911. As they're telling him the house is empty, they see the curtains of the bedroom window on the 2nd floor open. They're heavy curtains and they parted from the center, so they claim it couldn't really be possible from air vents kicking on or anything like that. And all 3 officers and the house sitter all see it. Then the guy asks police to come back inside with him because he is going to take the dog to a different home for the night and he needs to get the dog out of the cage. The police refuse to go back inside with him. Not the best example of public service. I was a cop for about 5 years and worked for a boss that used to tell this story all the time. Just a warning. This story contains self-harm, so don't read if that will trigger you. When he was a rookie and got his first car, they mostly walked back then. He patrolled his district and decided to check out this cemetery area. Kids often went back there, as it was near a skate park, to do extracurricular activities. As he drove up, he saw a person who had hung himself from a tree. He immediately called it in and the scene was properly investigated. Well, the weird part is, the next night he became curious, so he went back to the same area. The tree was gone. The city had not put in any work orders to cut the tree. The city I worked for did not do that type of thing, as it costs money and the city was too cheap. There was also no stump in the ground. There was no place the tree could have gone. He was in that spot for about 6 or so hours during the investigation, so he was familiar with it. It spooked him at the time. Obligatory. Not my story but my uncle's. Years ago my uncle told us about a woman who would call the police station just about every night claiming that fairies or elves were breaking into her house and stealing her food. As is custom, every time she calls, they send a unit to check on her. My uncle gets it about 2-3 times per week. Every night they stop by her house and reassure her that no one has broken in and calm her down. One night when he gets to the house, she has poured powdered sugar all over the floor to record their tracks, and my uncle says he literally has to do a double take. All over the floor of her kitchen are these little tracks, tiny like nothing he's seen before. His partner starts taking photos and trying to figure it out. Few other officers come in, as most of them had gotten the call to her house too and want to see it. 10 police officers all completely baffled as to what these weird little prints are. Turns out a possum had babies and they were sneaking into her kitchen for warmth or food. The prints looked so foreign because most of the time baby possums are carried by their mother, not running around. 7 are rounded up and released in a less residential area. Not a cop, but I used to work private security. For a bit I worked at a shopping mall. My partner and I already had a feeling this place was haunted. One reason being the homicide that happened right before I was hired. The very west of the mall made the hair on my neck stand up the most, and I don't know why. It's also good to note that there is an animal shelter at this end of the mall. You can see the cats and dogs through the windows at night. They would bark and whine a lot. One night I was walking to that end of the mall and I started feeling like someone was following me or walking behind me. When I got to the shelter, none of the animals were making noise. But I swear to God all of the ones that were awake were staring at or behind me. I got really bad goosebumps and a horrible feeling in my gut. I put my head down and walked as fast as possible out of the closest door. Once I was outside, all of the negative feelings went away.